Unlocking unlimited potential means the work is not about you. It's about seeing the greatness in others and using your own story and your own vulnerability to unleash the potential that others have.
It means going for it, never disqualifying yourselves, right? And then taking the gremlins of fear, doubt, and worry, which are never going away. Fearlessness does not exist. It means taking fear, doubt, and worry, those gremlins that are whispering in your ear, invite them in, make them some coffee, tell them to have a seat, and tell them that they're gonna watch you get after it. Fear, doubt, and worry has to be managed.
You need to know who you are. And once you know who you are, then you can go ahead and be greatness for someone else.
Be unapologetically you.
That everyone has a story and everyone has something to bring to the table.
That I understand that I am enough.
Empowering yourself to own your story.
We limit ourselves to what we think is going to happen, and we don't open the doors to the possibility of what's next.
It's knowing who you are now and then doing anything necessary into becoming who you want to be.
Well, I want you to know that inside of you exists an unlimited potential, and I believe in it. And one reason that I believe in it is because inside of us is a potential that once we learn how to control it and harness it and live it with passion, that we'll be able to spread it through our schools and our classrooms and through our communities and into our world like wildfire. Join me on the journey as we explore together unlocking unlimited potential. And I can't wait to be on this journey with you.
Welcome to the Unlocking Unlimited Potential Stories show. Hope everybody is doing well. I get so fired up every time I watch that video because I get the chance to update that every single week when someone awesome comes on. So it is such a great recap of all the amazing shows. We're running into season 2 here, and it is so awesome to have this guy right next to me, George Couros. How you doing, George?
Good. What happens if I don't make the video?
You're gonna make the video. It's part of it. It's included in the package.
I don't know if I'm gonna say anything good, so I'm kind of nervous. I'm like, where am I going to be at? Am I going to be at the beginning, end? Am I going to even make it? So it's going to be.
Don't even think about it. I wouldn't even think about it. You just take your time, and I think by the end of this show, you'll have a good idea of something you want to say. How's that sound?
You got it.
Well, listen, I appreciate you joining us from Canada.
Thanks, man.
And from the other side of the border, man. I wish that border was open and we could go and meet all our educational friends across that border, because I got a lot of them over there. So that would be pretty cool someday.
Yeah, no, we're actually in a lockdown in Alberta. I think New York State borders on Ontario. They're on like a massive lockdown. So it's a little frustrating, but yeah, it's the same thing. I've been so blessed to meet so many amazing educators, not only in the United States, but obviously around the world. And it's cool because we have that opportunity now in a way that I didn't when I first started my career. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back on the road and connecting with people face to face.
Yeah, and it's been such a wild ride. I mean, you've done so many conferences, I'm sure, and presentations and speaking gigs at so many different places that you've just been doing it from the comfort of your own home, which is obviously positive and negative, but there's nothing like that personal touch, right?
Yeah, and I think I was just talking about this with someone recently. The thing, like, I love being up on stage, trying to inspire audiences, push thinking, reminding them of how incredible they are in the work that they do. But I think for me personally, one of the things I really struggle with is just little conversations that you have after with people that you don't know. And I think a lot of times we talk about, people we get to meet from Twitter and all that other stuff. But there's these huge opportunities to connect with people that I don't know from social media, don't have social media accounts, and push my thinking, share ideas, just have good conversations. And I think that those things, I don't know if I can say I ever took them for granted because I love them. I know I miss them tremendously. Right. I think that's something that because I still have the opportunity to have those conversations, but I don't get the hallway, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, we have to resort to what we're doing right now, podcasts, live shows,
Yeah.
and all these other great things. But you're right. There's not enough people in the room, honestly, because that opportunity to, to be there and to speak and to present and to do all that, that's great. But then it's that personal connection. There's nothing really that can replace that. And it's the same in the classroom too, I think. There's some things that are working in the classroom, but there's also a lot of things that, without that human connection, there's really a lot to go on that needs to be said,
Yeah, I've had a few people email me, talk about how much they have been struggling with that they never were just about content. They didn't become teachers because they just wanted to disperse content, and because of like health guidelines, things like that, they're really missing the relational piece. And they're doing their best to create in some aspect, like like doing this podcast, right? And I have my own podcast, having conversations with people is fantastic, but there's just something that I really miss about that, being in that same space and connecting with that. And so like, I just really appreciate it. I know, as a dad, that's something I really like. I honestly, I know this sounds horrible. I don't really care about the content when you teach my kid. I want to know that my kid feels safe in your class, that they feel appreciated, that you are trying to bring out the best in them. And that takes a relationship. And so it's just kudos to the teachers all around the world that are doing an amazing job to do that this year under such terrible circumstances. But I know that they wish they could just kind of have it back to, how important that connection is.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's anything that's reminded us how important those connections are, it's definitely been the last year for sure. We kind of jumped right in and just started going. I didn't even have a chance to introduce you. I mean, I don't think you need much of an introduction. I mean, but I think it's important. I mean, You're a speaker, you're a TEDx speaker, and I love this title, Innovative Teaching, Learning, and Leadership Consultant. That is a whole bunch of great stuff inside of one. I love that title. You're a best-selling author of The Innovator's Mindset and Innovate Inside the Box. You got a blog. You also have a podcast called The Innovator's Mindset. I've been on it. I've appreciated it. I also love the 3-question feature. That is a good part. I appreciate that. Trying to do my best impression. I don't want to steal from you, but I really wanted to steal that 3-question segment.
It's a good idea. I don't know. I came up, I usually take a little bit of a little sabbatical, because my busiest time is usually during the summer, right? Speaking at conferences, things like that. And that's a downtime. So some of my slowest times in December, and I try to take a step away just to kind of think of some new ideas. And that actually came out just kind of thinking like, what's something I would want to know from every guest, right? And those are the 3 questions. And actually it's funny that it was just kind of like on a whim, like a shower idea, just something that just came to me one day. And now it's actually turning into a book. And I have 15 different authors, and 5 answer one of the questions, who's a teacher that inspired you, and then 5 answer who's an admin that inspired you, and then 5 answer who is what advice would you give to yourself as a first-year teacher. And it's just such amazing. Like I just said, tell that story, what you think, and it was like a little concerning because you think you'd get the same answer over and over again, but such great stories and emotional. It's like going to be kind of a chicken soup type book coming out with just incredible authors sharing their thoughts. So like, it's just interesting. A lot of times, you talk about unlocking unlimited potential. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the way that I do my work is that I do, and then I think. I don't necessarily think and then do. And I don't know, the way that I explain that maybe doesn't sound great, but I think a lot of times we overthink stuff, and then we talk about all the ways that we shouldn't do stuff. We talk ourselves out of this. I kind of just say like, hey, I'm going to try this and let's see where it goes, and I'll modify it along the way. And what came as one day, like, hey, maybe I should try this, is now in a book that's coming out soon, which is kind of fascinating. But yeah, I mean, it's great that they have, I asked 15 people, and I got 15 yeses, and that was it. We were good to go. So really excited about it.
That's awesome. And I can totally relate from the whole experience of just diving right in. I think that's a really important thing that we do with our students. We obviously, have to think things through, but sometimes your kids, they remind you of something. Their learning styles remind you of something. Right. They enjoyed something that they really liked, and you want to try that again or whatever. And there's certain things that, my students in my class, they challenged me. They're like, Dr. Beck, can we go outside every single day? And I said, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
And so I did it for 5 days, 6 days, 7 days. And then as we got out there, I started to notice that like they were laughing.
Right.
They were just hanging out. It was just a different experience. And that 5, 10, sometimes a little bit longer of minutes, when we came back to the classroom, it was a better environment. The kids want to be there. You said it earlier about relationships. Like if you don't want to be there, then why are you here? And I think that that's an important thing that we really need to consider. It comes before everything else.
Yeah, I talked about this in Innovate Outside the Box. I actually talk about this core of innovative teaching and learning. We talk about like empowering learning experiences, being a master learner, learner-driven evidence-informed practice. And those are really important aspects. But what I put in the middle of that image and kind of the whole idea is that relationships are the core. And without that, you can't do the other things, right? They won't be as effective. And when I was talking about that, one of the things I shared was a study from Ohio State. And it basically said the importance of social capital in classrooms, how important that is. And it referred to basically saying that simply greeting kids in the hallways before they enter a classroom is shown to actually improve math and reading scores. Now, this is something I always say. I have no idea. If you told me that without having research to back you up, I would believe you, because if you told me, hey, we're going to start the day making sure people feel valued as they enter our spaces, of course they're going to do better, right? It's kind of an obvious thing. And what people need to see, and I think a lot of educators really embrace, is that, yeah, it's 10 minutes of time that, you might spend traditionally setting up things for your classroom, et cetera, kids out in supervision, recess, whatever. But it is actually an investment you're going to get back tenfold, because you value kids at the beginning of that class. You're probably 20, 30 minutes less of like, getting kids back on task that, don't trust you, don't know if they really, really you like them kind of thing. And so I think it's that time that we spend with that, it actually always comes back to us later. It always comes back to us. Maybe not, doesn't feel like it at that point, but one of the things when I present, I probably spend 10, 15 minutes just building rapport with the audience. And then when you do that, it actually makes them want to listen to you for the last 45, where I think a lot of times people spend a minute and then people don't listen to you for 59 minutes, right? And because they don't, know if you're there for the right things, they don't really know anything about your story. So I think it's really, I have to do that in a really short amount of time. I think it's something that we have to be thoughtful of every single day. It's not something we just build relationships at the beginning of the year and then just go business. It's an everyday thing.
Absolutely. I use a phrase all the time, economy of time. The things that you spend time on, they have to be beneficial to the result. They have to be beneficial to the success, and they have to be beneficial to the well-being of yourself and those around you. So if you're doing those things and you're taking those risks, I think the advice that we're both giving you is just to keep doing it, to dive right in, to just start something new. And if it goes wrong, you'll make up for that time, because at the end of the day, if your students are motivated, if they're inspired, if they're excited, if they want to be there and they want to be there with each other and they want to be there with you, that's the end goal, right? That's the unlocking unlimited potential for me as well.
Yeah, that's like the idea of relationships. I think a lot of people think it as this kind of like fluffy element, but really it is so you can put people in a position where you can push them, right? You can challenge them. Because like if I know you have my back, I'm way more comfortable with you pushing me, right? But if I feel you're attacking me, or you're trying to like knock me down because it'll make you feel better about yourself, then what growth is going to happen in that space? And the one thing I refer to all the time, and I'm sure people listening, and I see Jillian Dubois popped in. Hi, Jillian. I hope you're still there. Hope you're having a wonderful day. And
I'm so terrible at communicating with people in the chat. I just have to throw that out there.
I just saw Jillian. I saw her in the opening segment.
Shout out to Jillian.
Yeah. Hey, do you know what? Shout out to Jillian. I even got my little air horn.
There it is. Oh, you just made the show better. I'm gonna have you on every show now.
That's right. So the Rita Pearson TED Talk, there's something that, and if you haven't seen it, I'm sure every educator has seen it, but if you haven't, I highly suggest it. She says that, you can't learn from people you don't like. And people say, no, you can learn from people you don't like. And I get that. Yeah, of course. I've learned from not only people I don't like, I've probably learned from people I dislike, right? That I don't like at all. But what I take away from that conversation is that we go so much further when we do have that relationship. We go so much further than if we don't. And that to me is what really matters, because like I am, like I said, I'm more open to you pushing and challenging me if I actually know you care about the work that I do. And I think it's not just in the classroom, it's how we interact online. It's how we, interact, at work. There has to be that push and support, element there too, that we're doing it for the right reasons. And sometimes, egos get in the way. It's like you're giving advice to diminish, not to uplift. And I think that to me that's where I try to do. And I'm not 100% perfect, obviously, at it, but it's something I always consider when I'm trying to help and support people that I work with.
And I think it's very simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
It starts with that simple question: how are you doing today?
Yeah.
And like, to me, that's really critical, and that's important, because sometimes we overcomplicate something like this. Oh, it's social emotional learning. We put these labels on it that starts to complicate everything, when really it is how well do you know what's going on in your kids' lives, your students' lives? How well do you know what's going on in their home? I think that's one thing that was pretty interesting about the pandemic, having an opportunity to be on a screen and to be able to see the students in their home environment. I learned so much just from seeing the little brother, the sister, the pet, all of the things that were going on in the house, where they were sitting. Not that it was necessarily a terrible thing that, at sometimes you would see them and they'd be left to their own devices, and you would wonder, like, you'd feel for them. But it gives you a little bit more empathy, and it gives you a little bit more perspective on that place to start. So when students come back, okay, well, I can start here, but you still are having that difficult time getting that one-on-one connection. But as they walk into the door, and, my school happens to be 100% in person, and it's the most amazing thing ever. I mean, the year that I've had as an educator has been one of the best years ever, because of that mantra right there, is less is more, focusing on quality relationships first. And I think that's what I love about the work that you do and stuff that you say, and your kind of whole platform with that. So, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, that to me, what you just said, I don't try to always jump on the latest and greatest. I don't try to do those things, because I think, especially in schools, people feel this, like you hear schools, you mentioned my job title, which honestly I just made up, right? So it's like, that's the thing, when you work for yourself, you can make up whatever job title you want. But the thing with a lot of schools, they look at innovation, and it's always about being cutting edge. It's always about the latest thing, the latest strategy, the latest technology, things like this. But did they get good at the last one, right? It's like we're moving so quickly to try new things that we don't give time to actually have depth on stuff, right? And for me, I think that innovation is something about how we actually understand something so well that we can, it's like understanding your teaching strategies, the things that you actually do in the classroom, to really be able to iterate to work with every kid. But if we don't have time to learn that ourselves, then it doesn't actually happen. And the analogy that I always give is, you hear about, and I'm not a jazz musician, so like I'm just making this up from like watching movies and what I hear on TV shows. But you have this, you think about these jazz musicians that they share that can improvise on the spot. Well, the reason they could do that is because they're so well versed in their instrument. They know the basics so well that then they have the ability to create something really powerful with what they actually know. And I think that's what we have to ensure that we do ourselves. But I think a lot of times we don't even get that opportunity in our schools, because the districts or the school is pushing the new initiative. And I'm like, wait a minute, we just started this last day, and you haven't given us a chance to really dig deep into it. And like you said, that idea of less is more. How do we go further and deeper, as opposed to next?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is the bigger the school and the bigger the data population, the more consistency you want to have. And then the whole other end is well, how do you measure it? How do you measure my relationship with my students? And how do you measure what makes an effective teacher? Because there's so many things outside of just relationships that make you a good educator. But to me, I put that relationship piece like on a very, very high part of the pyramid. And I think that's critical to where we're going. And everybody's talking about what's the new way forward going to be. And so I think that goes to show that, like, we get into this place where we overthink things, like you're saying, and sometimes you just got to jump in, and you got to start with the relationship first and foremost.
Yeah, it's actually interesting when you said about how, you know, what the school looks at as valuable, and I think that's a really important element. And when I wrote Innovate Inside the Box, Katie and I talked about this core, and I mentioned it earlier. We have relationships in the middle, then empowered learning experiences, learner-driven evidence-informed practice, and master learner, right? So we talk about each one of those ideas and why they're important. So they're kind of the big picture thing. But what I actually talk about in the book is I'm not to determine what that looks like in your school. You do. I don't know your context. I don't know how you're doing that. So what I actually suggest is that you read the chapter, you talk it over with your staff, and then you decide, what does this look like? How do we know if we're effective? And you create that yourself. But what a lot of schools actually do is they use someone's measurement outside that has never been in their school, whether it's like the Danielson framework, which I think has a lot of great stuff in it, but but also probably Charlotte Danielson hasn't been to your school, so it doesn't understand the context. And there's no knock on the person, but it's just, you know, you shouldn't, like, every school has a different context. Every school has, you know, every classroom, every kid, you know, has different circumstances. And so really, it is not for me to define that and decide that for a school. What I want is to kind of, hey, here's a starting point for things to think about. You figure that out as a school. You talk about that as a community so that we could decide that together. And like I even talked about switching it from the idea of like teacher evaluation to teacher conversation, where I decided as a teacher in that school, like, here's how I know I'm successful and here's the proof I've actually done it. I'm way more willing to buy into that type of conversation if I've actually had some sway to lead it in the first place, as opposed to, well, I didn't actually say that makes me a good teacher. This is just something that someone else said, and you might not even agree. So I think it's really important that when we're developing schools and as we're continuing to move forward, that it's not just like having conversations to make us feel good, but it's actually utilizing conversations and acting upon them. Like, I don't want like when we ask kids like, hey, what are you really good at? What's your strength? And we ask them at the beginning of the year as like kind of an icebreaker activity, and then we never follow up or utilize that. Why even ask, right? So it's like, how do you utilize that information to actually find a way moving forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I found myself saying that many times, you know, that whatever we're doing, and, you know, same thing goes with like values as well, and all those other those big symbols that we have in our school, you know, in those things we do at the beginning of the school year, you know, how often do we revisit those, and what's the purpose behind those? So, you know, we talk a lot about relationships with students, relationships with our staff, relationships with those we lead. We also have to talk a little bit about relationships with ourselves, right? So one thing is when we can take a look in the mirror and we can realize, hey, you know, I want to do this to become better. You know, and I'm grateful for these things, but I can still do these things better and be a better person tomorrow than I am today. So you talk a little bit about, and I know you've been sharing a lot about it, is your weight loss journey. I would love it. You share a little bit about that, because first of all, I applaud you. That's a tremendous. I didn't even really know you had 85 pounds to lose. Looking at 91 you right now. 91. Yeah. There's gonna be nothing left soon.
Well, that's not the goal, but yeah, no, I kind of set out. My first goal was to lose 80 pounds, and then to kind of see how I lift there, and then I set another goal. So I'm shooting for 100 pounds right now. So we'll see. I'm just kind of addressing it as I go. Yeah, but yeah, it's been good. Like I think the only time we ever met was, you know, all you saw was my head. So. Right. So like, I don't have 80 pounds to lose off my head. So, yeah.
Listen, I'm just telling you, you're beautiful. That's all. I'm just telling you, you're beautiful. But I appreciate it, and I know. And so talk a little bit about, you know, how on earth do you go in 3 months, right? Roughly 3 months.
Oh no. It's way longer. Yeah. So actually, like I did a whole podcast on it and talked about it. And one of the things I talked about, like to be honest with you, I've been struggling with my weight since I was 5, right? So I had, you know, I was a really chubby kid, you know, I had struggled in hockey, used to get bullied, you know, for that. I then lost weight and then had a growth spurt at the same time. So I spent like high school where, you know, I was like at a weight that was consider to be healthy. And, like health is a very personal thing between yourself, your doctor. So, that was something that I had dealt with. But then, high school, gain weight, big transitions in my life, I tend to like have issues. So probably I've been really dealing with this for the last little while, but probably for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been trying to lose weight. And I talked about how basically like I try this, like there was one year, I don't know, someone responded to this and they were kind of shocked. Like I actually, I think it was in 2019, I started an app called Aptive, and my goal was to run 100 miles a month. That's what I was going to do. And I like blew that out of the water. I was running like 200 miles a month, right? Wow. Didn't lose any weight, nothing, just nothing. Got better at running, but and I think so. I was like, okay, so there's some things I learned from here that I'm going to apply. And then I tried V-Shred, and it's like a workout thing. Mm-hmm. Did that, followed the exercise routine religiously, got better at exercise, didn't lose any weight, right? And then I started this Lumen thing where it kind of it tells you what your metabolism is, and it's kind of like terrifying because it was like a targeted ad on YouTube. I'm like, oh God, this knows exactly. And that's how I started V-Shred. It was like a targeted ad. I'm like, this is like crazy. How much Google's reading my mind.
You were just talking about it to someone, and all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah, totally. And so that really made me focus on my eating. And so it was like measure, and I was like, oh, your metabolism is slow. You should eat like this. And then so I did, I think, for a few days. And then on Monday it says, hey, what's your weight? I'm like, oh God. So I hadn't weighed myself for like years because I was terrified of the answer, to be honest with you. And then I weighed myself, and I talked about this in the podcast. So I had in my mind what I weighed, and I was not happy with that. And then I got on the scale, and I was 40 pounds heavier than that. And I was like, oh geez, like this is like, and it was like serendipity, either like a day before or a day after. I saw something that said, it's taken you years to get into this mess. It will not take you as long to get out. So I said, okay, so like I know what the answer is here. Like I exercise like crazy, but I don't change my eating habits. So I really started focusing on my eating habits, and then I started losing weight. And basically consistently, I can lose between 1 to 3 pounds a week. So I'm not doing it in an unhealthy way. I'm not like doing some like fad. I'm not doing keto or anything like that. I'm doing something that I'm trying to figure out. How can I maintain this long term, and how does this, like, how am I making sure that, like, I'm Greek. We grew up in a restaurant. Food's a big part of culture for us, right? Like enjoying food. I don't want to take that away. I think that's a really important thing for me. But there is also, to be totally upfront, there was a little bit of fear when I took that weight. My BMI was really high, and I know that BMI is not like the best measure. It's like kind of like a loose indicator. But one of the things I saw was that people that, had struggled with COVID, there was some weight stuff, and I had fallen into the obesity levels. And so I'm like, I have kids, if something happens here, like I have more control over this than I'm giving myself, credit for. And so I just started doing that. And I think one of the things I hear in education, and I'm not the biggest fan of, and I understand that because there's elements of it there. Like I can talk about like, hey, when I did Aptive, I totally failed. Well, yes and no. Like I didn't hit my weight loss goals, but I learned things from that process. We talk about so much failure, but I think it's learning from failure that matters. But the other element that I push back on is that success breeds success. When I started seeing some results, then it pushes you to keep going, right? And you start doing that, and then the results compound. Yeah, so I like have little goals. Like I break it down like, hey, I have like daily goals, weekly goals, and then long-term goals, and I try to break them down. And then what are my habits to like basically to achieve those goals? So I kind of connect them. And like what I was trying to do is like having habits but no goals, or goals and no habits, and saying like, hey, it's really important. And I know that you're a big fan of Dan Pink, and you mentioned that like that's part of like kind of connecting to motivation. And obviously that's some James Clear work on habits and things like that. So it's been good, and I feel a lot better. I have more energy with my kids, which honestly is really important to me. It's the most important element. I want to be around as long as possible. I started having kids a little bit later, and I'd like to be a granddad, but so I got to take care of myself so I can take care of my family.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story. So kind of, like we were talking about earlier, finding that thing that works, you're also finding that you were finding that thing that worked for you, and all the reasons why were related to really your longevity. and I love that.
Yeah, and like I'm not gonna lie, like I want to look better too. Like I'm not like I don't like it's not just on the like I want to like I think that's part of it too. Is I like was you kind of said something. Something that you mentioned a mirror, and I mentioned this too. I felt that I was like walking by mirrors and didn't recognize myself anymore. Like it was like, who is that guy? Like I don't know it. And it was just it was like there's I've struggled, and I still do. I've struggled with depression for years. I have anxiety. And I know that there is a correlation between mental well-being and physical well-being. There's a connection there. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a psychologist. I know this from reading about it. I know this from my own personal experience. And so, yeah, like I still deal with those things, but it makes them like a little bit easier. But I felt like I had lost myself. And I think for me, having welcoming a new daughter to the world in 2020, terrible year for tons of people. And I understand why. And I look at 2020 as a good year because we welcomed a daughter into the family. And just thinking like I have to figure this out. I have to figure like what is going on because I want to be a good example to my kids. I want to be confident. I want to be around as possible. And like what I need to see myself again. And so that's
and not waiting, right? And you've been working and you've been doing it the whole time, and not waiting to figure it out, right? If we've learned anything from a time of a pandemic. I also had a child in 2020, so I'm right there with you in that same ballpark. We're both girl dads.
Yeah,
that is a tall task ahead. I'm looking forward to it. It's been quite a journey so far. But you talk a little bit, and that's what we were kind of envisioning when we talked about this is, how do you get from where you are to where you want to be? And that's kind of, it starts with that recognition. It starts with understanding what is it that you want and what is it that you don't want, and then starting to identify what works for you. That's what I've gained from hearing what you're saying.
Yeah, and it's like I said, we always talk about like, oh, like failures. It's like, no, it's learning from failures. It's not like you can like I'll give you an example that I'm sure many people can connect with is that you're saying like, oh, like I had this relationship for 5 years, total waste of time, right? Was it a waste of time? Now, it might not have ended the way you liked, right? You might not have been happy during that time, but you might have learned to say like, hey, this is what I don't want. These are the things that I no longer want, right? Or, hey, I did actually appreciate this. Or like saying like, hey, there's these things that I did or didn't do that I need to improve on. Or you could just say you wasted 5 years. And I think that for me is what I've tried to like understand is like, hey, those things that didn't get the results that I wanted at the time, they weren't waste of time. They were ways for me to like take those things, learn from them, and apply them to my next step. And I feel like all those parts starting to add up, started compounding interest, right? And then ultimately, then I started seeing success. But I could have just like, hey, that one thing I tried didn't work, so I'm not going to even try. Everything's a failure. And then, but I take ownership of like, hey, I did the V shred, I did the exercises, but I didn't do the diet. I kind of ignored the diet part. I figured if I could, and I think part of it too was, I'm in my 40s. When I was in my 20s, I could outrun my diet. Didn't matter, right? Like, I could exercise my way out of any, weight gain. I can't do that anymore, and probably because I'm a little bit slower and things like that. But yeah, I think it's just kind of taking each one of those things that you learn from, even when things don't go your way, is instead of looking at it as just wasted time, is really important. And Alfonso in comments, thanks for your kind words. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Challenges are opportunities to grow for sure. And I think that you're a living example of that, my man. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I really do. It's an awesome story. And I know we were talking about this a little bit before in the pre-show, but one thing we do on this episode is we dedicate the episode, and you already kind of mentioned it a little bit, to someone who's out there unlocking unlimited potential in all whom they serve. He's going to just jump up on the screen here. So there he is right there, Dan Pink. He wrote an endorsement for Innovate Inside the book, right? And which was awesome. And I'm a huge fan of his book. I read his book Drive, and actually, if you haven't picked that up, people, there is a whole chapter in that related to being a teacher in schools, which I think is amazing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, talk a little bit about that. That sounds amazing.
Well, actually, interesting. Drive is one of my favorite books ever. I really loved it. And when I was a principal when I was a principal, I had read that book, and new principal to a school, and we were doing like award ceremonies like every other school, right? We were doing award ceremonies, and I read Drive, and I was like, oh, this might not be a good thing, right? Especially it was like K-6 school. So we started having conversations. I started actually reflecting openly about the book and sharing my thoughts on it. And one of the things that Dan Pink so I'm talking about like innovation, creativity. And one of the things he talked about is like basically how awards, carrot and stick process actually kind of actually is counterintuitive to developing creativity. That it's great for like, hey, can you mow the lawn, right? Things that you don't necessarily have to think about, you just do, versus being thoughtful. And what we actually talked about is like having awards actually getting kids to focus less on learning as opposed to get the right checklist. So really because of that book, we started having conversations in our school, and we actually got rid of award ceremonies in our school. And I'll tell you, the kindergarten kids did not care, right? Because they didn't know anything different. I think some of the grade 6 kids were like not really happy about it because they had been so conditioned to that way. But we talked with the parents, and universally, because we always kind of accept that, like, hey, do awards really drive kids who aren't getting them? It probably makes them feel worse. But then we started to realize, like, hey, are the awards driving kids to do the wrong things, right? Like to actually go be counterintuitive, right? So like you'll see schools say like, oh, it's all about collaboration, right? But then they have like all the top competitive individual awards when you walk into the school. It's like, well, is it about that? Or like, what are you saying? Like some of the messages are mixed as we go in. It's like, what do we recognize and what do we say we want? And are they actually the same thing? So, we got rid of them as a school, and we were good with it. And people, I thought there was going to be massive pushback, but I shared my learning of that book with my staff, with my parent community. We had lots of conversations, and the time we actually said, hey, we're moving away from this, nobody pushed back at all. And like, if you would have said to me 5 years before as a principal, do you see yourself leading a school to get rid of awards? I'm like, what are you talking about? That would be insane to me. But that book really shifted a lot. So it's something I've always loved. Dan Pink's work. A Whole New Mind is also a favorite. But I have a mutual friend, and I asked, like, would he consider sharing this? And and Dan Pink, actually, kudos to him. He didn't just write an endorsement. He actually read the book, because I think sometimes people give, I'm very adamant that I don't endorse books unless I read them all the way through. And he said, give me some time. I want to read it. And so it was quite an honor. And someone I've looked up to in outside education, but like motivation. If you don't think motivation ties into what we do in school, then I think you're missing out on something. So there's lots of things we can learn from some of those outside minds.
Absolutely. I say it time and time again, and you'll notice in my book, Unlocking Unlimited Potential, I use a lot of personal development authors. Some you've already mentioned, Jack Canfield for one, Bob Proctor, Tony Robbins, Rachel Hollis, Brene Brown. The work that they're doing is all about getting to the top of the pyramid, and how do we get there? And their work is, just because it's not in the education field entirely, doesn't mean that it doesn't serve importance to the work we're doing. And so, I appreciate that. We could go a whole nother episode on the whole thing about awards versus no rewards. And man, that's a whole nother episode. I appreciate you for being on this show. Before we go, though, I got to ask you one question. I got to ask you to finish this sentence. It's your moment, man. You ready? I think you're prepared now. We've scaffolded it all the way up to it. It's like going to roll right off your tongue. So unlocking unlimited potential means?
Unlocking unlimited potential means, to me, finding the best in yourself so you can actually help inspire that in others. That's the way I see it. That's the work I try to do, and that's what I try to inspire others. And I think teachers do that every single day by inspiring their kids to change the world. You think about a teacher's influence on the world, you can't even measure it. It's totally immeasurable, because they inspire kids that inspire people that, inspire the change we see in the world. So really, unlocking unlimited potential starts with seeing what we have in ourselves to bring out the best in others.
Perfect. That was poetic, man. That was,
thanks.
Listen, you nailed it.
I had 30 minutes to think about it. I was writing notes, not even listening to your questions. So.
I love it. I love it. So how
I gotta get on that video.
You did mention you have a new book coming up. You didn't say the title though.
Yeah, it's called Because of a Teacher, and it should be out at the beginning of the next school year ish. So September 2020. And I'm so excited about it because there's 15 different authors sharing really personal stories. I'll tell you, anyone who reads it, if you like, it's not like, I'm not saying it's like going to change the teaching practice forever. That's not what this book is. It's to remind us why we do what we do and just honor the teachers. And I can't remember the subtitle off the top of my head, but it's like, recognizing the teachers of our past to inspire the future together, something like that. And it's really kind of honoring the teachers. And really I shared about my own teachers that made an impact on me. So I'm 46 years old. I talk about my kindergarten teacher, my grade 3 music teacher, and my high school phys ed teacher. And I talked about them on my own podcast, shared it on YouTube. Every one of them commented and reached out to me. And I'm like, the reason I told you I'm 46, my kindergarten teacher had me 41 years ago. Right. And she commented. And so telling those stories about the teachers from our past, I think really doesn't just like inspire what we can continue to do in the future, but it honors a lot of people in our past that, maybe didn't feel appreciated at the time. So it meant a lot to me. And it was just so wonderful. And like, I'm 46 years old, talk to educators all over the world. There's no way I'm calling any of them by their first name. It does not matter. I cannot do it. Just cannot do it. So yeah, it was good. So I want to really honor the teachers from our past as well.
That's awesome. I mean, we always say, and that was kind of the premise of this show, is the importance of the stories of others, right? And how everybody's story really matters. And the story tells us who you are and who you want to be and where you've come from. And that's really valuable. And so I appreciate you coming on and telling your story, my man. I really appreciate it. For everybody else out there, I put up your website and your tags and everything. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, George Couros, COUROS.ca. That's basically, you go there, and Brandon, thanks for putting it up. You go there, you'll find everything you need to know.
All right. Perfect. Well, I appreciate you getting on with me. I really enjoyed this. There's a lot of educators that are going to benefit from that. So if you're catching this on watching it after the live show, we appreciate you for joining us.
Yep.
Remember, the journey toward unlocking unlimited potential begins with us, and continue to educate with passion, everybody. Have an amazing day. Thanks a lot, George.
Thanks, Brandon.